Hello and welcome to Forever Motorsports for another daily news video here in another race week. Very exciting once again to be in a race week, and nonetheless it is the Singapore Grand Prix race week, a very exciting one coming up this weekend. Yeah, looking forward to it. Let's though get into our first article here. Helmut Marko has finally come out and apologized for his offensive remarks about Sergio Perez. The Red Bull consultant Helmut Marko has apologized for blaming Mexican driver Sergio Perez's fluctuation in form on his cultural heritage. The 80-year-old Austrian, who is an advisor to the dominant Formula One team, issued a formal statement on Friday via the Service TV website. I would like to apologize for my offensive remark and want to make it absolutely clear that I do not believe that we can generalize about the people from any country, any race, and any ethnicity, Marko said. I was trying to make a point that Sergio Perez has fluctuated in his performance this year, but it was wrong to attribute this to his cultural heritage, Marko added. Marko, a former racer and close friend of the late Red Bull owner Dietrich Mateschitz, had made his remarks on the energy drinks company's television station following last weekend's Italian Grand Prix at Monza, wrongly describing Sergio Perez as South American. We know that he has problems in qualifying, he has fluctuations in form. He is South American and he is just not as completely focused in his head as Max Verstappen is or Sebastian Vettel. These are the comments that landed him in that hot water. And yeah, it is not the first time that Marko has referred to Perez as being from South America. The Mexican, though, comes from Guadalajara, which is geographically in North America. An earlier attempt by Marko to clarify his comments only dug him in deeper. Yeah, certainly not going too well for the Austrian of Helmut Marko there. With the Austrian news website OE24 reporting Marko as saying it wasn't meant that way. I meant that a Mexican has a different mentality than a German or a Dutchman, but who knows, maybe it is controlled. Yeah, and as I said, that landed him even hotter water. While Marko attends races in Red Bull racing uniform, he reports to the energy drink company and is not an employee of the British-based Formula One champions, who had no media comment. Nevertheless, Marko's ill-advised comments have sparked an online backlash among fans and made headlines in Mexico. This cannot keep happening to Sergio Perez, declared motorsport website The Race on Friday. He deserves better than to have to grin and bear derogatory comments from a senior figure in Red Bull's Formula One organization. The way Helmut Marko talks about him needs to stop. I certainly agree with this. Yeah, a lot of people having a lot of backlash over Helmut Marko's comments, and then continuing with this feed, with this comment here, the Red Bull Racing daily feed on social media site X, formerly known as Twitter, commended Marko's comments in a statement to its 35,000 followers. Such comments will not be tolerated. A racial stereotype was used to criticize his performance, which is absolutely disgraceful and inexcusable, it said. Perez joined Red Bull in 2021 with the team looking for a solid driver to support Dutch teammate Max Verstappen, who is now heading to his third world title, with Germany's Vettel having won 4 world titles for Red Bull from 2010 to 2013. The Mexican has won 6 races, 2 of them this season, and has a contract until 2024. He is second overall in the championship, but is 145 points behind his teammate Max Verstappen right now, and his future in the team is kind of unknown at this moment. Marko did compliment Perez for finishing second in Italy last weekend, a race that handed Verstappen a 10th victory in a row. He has had a very good race, overtaking 3 drivers in George Russell and the Ferraris, which was not easy, said the Austrian. Yeah, well, glad that Helmut Marko has finally come out and apologized for his derogatory comments against Sergio Perez, and glad that he has finally come out and done all of that. Moving on, though, to our next article, staying on the topic of Red Bull, though, Sebastian Vettel has been reunited with Red Bull's RB7 in their Nordschleife demonstration run. Sebastian Vettel was reunited with his 2011 title-winning Red Bull RB7 during this last weekend ahead of the annual 12-hour endurance race at the Nürburgring. The 4-time Formula One world champion took to the full 15.7-mile combined Nordschleife and Grand Prix track as part of Red Bull's Formula Nürburgring event, alongside a host of other high-profile drivers, riders, and vehicles, including David Coulthard in a 2012 RB8, which was originally set to be driven by Daniel Ricciardo. Until the Austrian was ruled out, of course, due to his broken wrist. Sebastian Vettel drove his RB7 on the run, one of 5 cars built by Red Bull for the 2011 season, and one of 4 currently in service as a running show car for Red Bull promotional events. Chassis number 1 was driven by Mark Webber at that year's Monaco Grand Prix. Just find where I was. But was not campaigned by Vettel himself, who drove chassis number 3 for the first 12 races of the season before moving to chassis number 5. Vettel said, "The sound was great. Fortunately, I still fit in the seat," Vettel said in an Instagram live video broadcast after he tested the car on Friday ahead of the event. The feel for the car came back straight away, and it was fantastic. Obviously, the cars are a little bit smaller than they are now, but they are also a lot tighter and a lot more agile. I'm very proud of that. I haven't gotten fat yet. It was a lot of fun." The car was being run on synthetic carbon-neutral fuel, previously showcased by Vettel at the 2022 British Grand Prix with a 1992 Williams FW14B that he owns, and at the Goodwood Festival of Speed this year with the Williams and a 1993 McLaren MP4-8, also from Vettel's own collection. "I feel like I'm in a time capsule. Lots of memories come back," said Vettel. "Everything fits together here today, including the fact that we now use synthetic, i.e. CO2 neutral fuels. Motorsport is my great passion and I want to preserve the sport. Fuels can be produced synthetically and serve as a substitute. This may not be the only solution, but it is part of the solution. It is important that we all realize that we have to do something, and the best thing that you can do is not feel any difference in the car. It's just as much fun." It was Vettel's first time driving the RB7 since November 2014, when he drove the car in a demonstration run in Dubai. While his and Coulthard's lap at the Nürburgring marked the first time in a decade that modern Formula 1 machinery has taken to the Nordschleife, which was last used for a Grand Prix in 1976. Michael Schumacher made his final public appearance driving in a Formula 1 car in 2013, when he took a 2011 W02 out ahead of that year's 24-hour of Nürburgring. In 2007, Nick Heidfeld drove a BMW Sauber F106 on the track as well. Also in attendance at Formula Nürburgring was Gerhard Berger, driving a 1995 Ferrari F12 T2. Ralf Schumacher in the Williams BMW FW25 that he won in the 2003 European Grand Prix, as well as a host of other cars as well. As Yuki Tsunoda, the AlphaTauri driver, driving a Honda NSX GT3. So a very, very massive lineup of drivers and cars there this past weekend at the Red Bull Nordschleife run. I mean, I would have loved to have been there. That must have been an incredible, incredible event to have been a part of, and an incredible event to have gone and watched. Mark there saying in the comment section that Vettel needs to come back to Formula 1. I completely agree, but unfortunately, I don't think we will get him back in the sport anytime soon, unfortunately. But glad to at least have seen him in a car this last weekend, and always glad to see that smile of Sebastian Vettel's back in a Formula 1 car and back under his iconic racing helmets. Moving on though to some highlights ahead of this weekend's Singapore Grand Prix. Big Singapore upgrades are set to fire Red Bull's new plan to life. Red Bull's dominant ground effect concept might yield more success as AlphaTauri's significant upgrades for Singapore are introduced. Since the start of the 2022 season, Red Bull's concept with their RB18 and RB19 has been the clear leader, as the Milton Keynes-based team have romped win after win, and are closing in on securing both titles once again this season. While there were plenty of different approaches taken by other teams at the start of the 2022 Converge, the Converge has been a key topic as rivals have abandoned their own concepts in order to switch to Red Bull's, or at least attempt to emulate as closely as possible. AlphaTauri are one of the teams that are set for a major concept change, with Red Bull's second team, AlphaTauri, having set out with their own design philosophy for the ground effect area, but unlike their senior team, have met with precious little success. While the Red Bull romp to the titles, their second team are currently last in the Constructors' Championship and have scored just 3 points in 14 weekends of racing. AlphaTauri are set for a revolution in 2024, with a name change and new sponsors coming on board, while longtime team boss Franz Tost will retire and hand over the reins to new team boss Laurent Mekies and CEO Peter Bayer. Between now and the end of the season, AlphaTauri will also have to get used to a new car concept, with Bayer confirming to PlanetFormula1.com that they will converge on Red Bull's design philosophy, with a major upgrade coming to the AT04 at the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend. There are no quick gains, Bayer told Planet F1, about how AlphaTauri will work more closely with Red Bull going forward. I mean, this year we've seen some amazing changes in the results scheme, when suddenly Aston Martin popped up, and then suddenly McLaren popped up. But I think that's really down to the fact that they all understood what Red Bull Racing did in terms of design philosophy is the right one, with this new downforce element with everybody in following. We actually have a big upgrade coming for Singapore, which will follow the same philosophy, so everybody's closing in on that, and I think next year will be extremely close. Asked whether the philosophy change will mirror that of the Red Bull's RB19, Bayer confirmed that will be the case. While critics of Red Bull are often loathing to recognize the fact that current rules prevent sharing of resources, intellectual property, and even ideas, AlphaTauri's autonomy as a team has resulted in them slipping backwards in the sport at a time where the parent company is otherwise dominating the sport. Far from exploiting potential grey areas and regulations, AlphaTauri haven't even used all the permitted components that are available to them, with Bayer confirming there will be greater collaboration between Red Bull and his team going forward. With the cost cap and the technical regulations, you almost can't be like a sister or brother team. You have to be a Formula 1 team, he said. We need to go through that process of growing up, going through adolescence, and starting to walk on our own feet. Obviously, not in contradiction with getting support from our family, and I think that's really where we're also supposed to achieve. That's what we want to achieve. We can still exploit the technical collaboration because we haven't done that in the past. It is well known by now that if you think about the importance of the suspension nowadays, and that we're not using the suspension which we are allowed to use, it simply is a mistake. There's a lot of gains to be made in the suspension of the AlphaTauri team, because that is one of the key points where Red Bull's design engineer, I've just gone blank on his name, has spent the majority of his time, Adrian Newey. He spent the majority of his time in the suspension department, not in the air department. So it's very interesting to see that you can make a lot of gains in your suspension department. And rarely AlphaTauri should be taking those components, which they're legally allowed to do as a sister team. So very, very interesting going into the Singapore Grand Prix. Will we see the AlphaTauris making major gains? Let us know what you think in the comment section. I'm going to ask you in our poll, do you think that AlphaTauri will make gains in the Singapore Grand Prix? And that is now live. So, moving on though from that article about the upgrades coming for AlphaTauri, we'll move on to another article about Red Bull. Red Bull's driver dilemma coming to head as Formula 1 star is set for a major career blow. Red Bull have 3 drivers on the books with strong arguments to race for AlphaTauri. Currently in contention they have Daniel Ricciardo, Yuki Tsunoda, or Liam Lawson. So, you don't have to be a genius to know that 3 into 2 does not go, so Red Bull will have to inflict a potentially fatal blow on the career of one of its 3 drivers in the running for an AlphaTauri race seat next year. And the truth is that, right now, they could go for any of the 3 combinations available. A few weeks ago, the most likely outcome was the status quo. Yuki Tsunoda's consistent start to the season and notable improvements in his racecraft seemed to have been enough to earn another year, and Daniel Ricciardo was back on the grid, energized and ready to make the most of his second chance in Formula 1. And then he crashed in practice at Zandvoort and broke his hand. Of course, having him out of that seat now, possibly until Qatar. The Aussie has missed 2 races so far and will most likely be sidelined for a couple more. And during that time, Liam Lawson has had the chance to prove that he is ready for Formula 1. The New Zealander has gotten off to a very good start on that quest. While he hasn't scored a point yet in either 2 of his outings so far, he has, though, done really well in comparison to his teammate. The likelihood, though, is it is the performance of his car which has limited his results rather than the way he has driven it. Lawson has made his Formula 1 debut in a hectic Dutch Grand Prix, starting on dry tyres amid an immediate rain shower and then navigating the tricky wet to dry crossover before more heavy rain changed the game again. He finished 13th and then followed that up with an 11th place at the end of his first full weekend at Monza, a much better showing for the rookie. As Sky's Anthony Davidson pointed out, it is difficult to assess exactly how well Lawson has done so far, as his teammate Yuki Tsunoda did not start the second race in Monza. And F1's driver yardstick is always their teammate. So he did finish the race, though, ahead of the Japanese driver at Zandvoort, and by finishing 11th at Monza, was only 1 place off of Tsunoda's best finish in 2023. So far, no one at Red Bull has had a bad word to say about Lawson. And he has 2 more races at least to make even more of an impression for the Red Bull execs, given that Ricciardo is unlikely to be given the green light to return in either Singapore or Japan. One thing's for sure, though, is that Daniel Ricciardo will be back at the end or before the end of this season. His current expected return date is for next month's Qatar Grand Prix, and Red Bull is committed to giving him the chance that was promised. Furthermore, Red Bull wants Lawson to complete his season in the Japanese Super Formula Series, with the last race weekend scheduled for October 28th to 29th. He is still in title contention, and if he is successful, will become one of just 2 non-Japanese champions in the last decade. The other being his fellow New Zealander, Nick Cassidy. The way he has driven both in Super Formula and in his short-notice Formula 1 appearances this year has thrust Lawson into real contention for a 2024 seat. The question, though, Red Bull must be answering is, have his performances been good enough to uproot either Tsunoda or Daniel Ricciardo on a permanent basis? And if they decide that answer is yes, then which one of these 2 drivers are getting the axe? Keeping Tsunoda fits more with AlphaTauri's philosophy of developing young drivers, but Ricciardo's experience may prove invaluable to the team, which is in the midst of a significant transition. All of them will feel hard done by if they become the one whose Formula 1 career is placed under serious threat. So a very, very interesting topic there, asking who is going to be that driver kicked out of contention for the AlphaTauri seat for possibly next season. Very, very interesting there. Who do you think is going to be in the running for that seat there? I'm going to end this poll here and ask you your opinions of who is going to take that second, or who is going to be the combination in that AlphaTauri seat for 2023. Who will be the driver? So my question for you is, who will be the driver ousted from AlphaTauri? So let's start with Tsunoda, Ricciardo, and our third option will be, let me spot Ricciardo's name right though. Our third option, of course, will be Lawson. James there, just saying, wonder how Perez feels about Helmut Marko's comments. There hasn't been a public statement from Perez yet, has there? No, as far as I can see online, there hasn't been any public statements made by Sergio Perez or his team. So very, very interesting that they have kind of kept quiet on it. I understand why. Of course, it's one of their main team bosses that has said something about them. I think they're kind of just waiting until Perez can leave the team. I think they're kind of over it at this point. Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate that the end of Sergio Perez's contract with Red Bull is kind of ending in bittersweet terms. As Mark there says, Perez is too busy trying to find form, let alone a response. Well, I think Sergio Perez has proven that he has still got that form off the back of his Grand Prix weekend in Imola. He did quite well there, and I think he deserves maybe a renewal of that contract. But we'll have to wait and see what they do next year. Moving on, though, from that Red Bull article here talking about AlphaTauri drivers, we'll move on to Formula One setting targets for their 2026 regulations. And some of the rules have been released now with their regulations for 2026. Formula One targets a 50 kilogram weight reduction as part of their 2026 rules revamp. Formula One's 2026 rules are on course to produce shorter, narrower, and lighter cars, with the FIA targeting a 50 kilogram weight reduction by 2026. Motorsports racing's governing body is currently hard at work putting in place to outline chassis regulations for the next rules era that will kick off in 2026. As well as a planned shift towards active aero to help reduce drag on the straights, the FIA has offered some more details about what else could be changing in the next regulation changes. Speaking in an exclusive interview with Autosports, Italian language sister site motorsport.com.it, the FIA's head of single-seaters, Nicholas Tombassis, has said that the main shift will be in the size of the car. Thank you. With the dimensions of the wheels, which will be narrower, plus the rear wing and the car in general, we aim to reduce the weight of the cars by around 50 kilograms, he said. So it will be possible to see smaller single-seater cars, shorter and narrower, but we are talking about solutions that still need to be discussed. With the car on a diet, we will also be able to change cornering speeds a bit. Being lighter, they will go faster in straight lines, but will generate less aerodynamic load. So we will need to increase the hybrid's energy recovery to ensure adequate lap performance. The changes planned for 2026 will not have been without controversy, as Red Bull earlier this year warned of the potential for Frankenstein cars that would be impossible to race each other. There were even concerns about drivers needing to change down gear halfway down straights to try and boost their energy hybrid systems. Tombassis is clear though, however, that the FIA has put a lot of effort into ensuring that what is coming for 2026 works from the racing perspective. A lot of work has been done to understand how energy recovery and management will have been done and how overtaking can be done based on the aerodynamic configuration, he said. We have carried out many simulations by changing these parameters and have found solutions that seem to work adequately. Tombassis suggests, though, that some of the original concerns voiced about the performance of the 2026 cars were not based on up-to-date simulation models. If one took the 2026 power units and mounted them on current cars, probably the result would be the scenario put forward by those who were worried, he said. But in recent months, we have collected a series of very positive developments, so the comments expressed old positions. We also need to take into account that the engine and chassis will have to work together, and it will not be possible to think of one without the other. So, very interesting to see there what is possibly coming for Formula One in 2026. Certainly something myself and Mark have been really calling for smaller cars, more raceable cars that can actually get side by side to each other in smaller circuits and street circuits. Hopefully with these reduced footprints of these Formula One cars, we'll actually get exciting Monaco Grand Prix. This is what we want to see. We want to see cars moving towards the regulations and sizes of old, from the 90s, from the 80s. Those cars were much smaller in footprint to the cars that we have nowadays. I understand that the cars have to be huge to get the ground effects working, but I mean, we're in 2023 already. We should be able to figure it out with active aerodynamics, which is what they're wanting to bring in for 2026. And I think it's really going to help a lot more in terms of the raceability of the cars, as well as just the spectacle of Formula One as a whole. So really looking forward to that. Moving on though to another article about AlphaTauri. AlphaTauri are closer to becoming Hugo Boss Formula One team. Hugo Boss are said to be the next sponsor of Red Bull's B team Scuderia AlphaTauri, as the iconic German fashion brand extends its investment into Formula One with the goal of turning it into a winning outfit. Hugo Boss's CEO Daniel Grieder told Reuters last year, Formula One is also back better than ever. It's a global sport, and they also have commitments to a more sustainable world and races. I think the sport is even more relevant than ever. and the whole world is watching, and so many fans are into it, and I think it's also exciting at the moment. I think the balance that they have found now is perfect, said Greedle, of the Formula One's Netflix Drive to Survive inspired boom in the United States. At the time, a company spokesperson added, Hugo Boss is realigning its existing commitments in sports, and we will concentrate only on Formula One in the future. Since then, the speculation has been rife regarding the future involvement of Hugo Boss branding in Formula One. The company has a rich history with McLaren, their multiple championship-winning cars featuring the Boss logo, driven by the world champions Alain Prost, Niki Lauda, Ayrton Senna, Mika Hakkinen, and Lewis Hamilton. The McLaren-Hugo Boss partnership dated back to 1981 and ran to 2015, before the clothing manufacturer switched to Mercedes. Since 2022, Hugo Boss are part of Aston Martin's partner portfolio until 2025. But talking the paddock, much of the season is that the plan is to take over AlphaTauri and rebrand the Faenza operation to Hugo Boss Racing Team, or Scuderia Hugo Boss, or whatever they name the operation, starting in 2026. Hence, this is the last year of Red Bull's AlphaTauri project, which began in 2020, before the team was Toro Rosso, Red Bull in Italian, having morphed the program from F1 Minnows Minardi. It became the hotbed for Red Bull Racing's young driver talent development program. The likes of Sebastian Vettel and Max Verstappen, among several drivers in Red Bull and Formula One, have made their way through the junior team. Unlike in the earlier days, and its reason to be the team is no longer a Formula One driver development platform, as Pierre Gasly was given huge refuge in the team after his Red Bull promotion failed, and remained there for 6 seasons. Eventually, Gasly departed, whereby they put in Nick de Vries, not from within their driver development pipeline, but also failed and was sent packing after 10 races. Yuki Tsunoda is on form in the other car for 3 seasons now, and is theoretically next in line to be promoted to Max Verstappen's teammate. Yeah, interesting though to see that there is the possibility of Hugo Boss coming to sponsor that second Red Bull team. I mean, it's been a massive talking point for the past few races, and I think we will have them coming into the sport, which is why we're seeing that promotion of all of these new CEOs and new team bosses in that AlphaTauri team at the moment. And I think that's why they're realigning themselves for 2024 to try and appeal more to the likes of Hugo Boss. I see we have Hayden there in the comment section there saying, Helmut Marko forgets if it wasn't for Perez, Max wouldn't have won his first championship. I completely agree. And yeah, I agree that Sergio Perez does need to be appreciated more in that team, and certainly by Helmut Marko. Moving on though to another article here saying hidden mechanisms and concealed parts. What is triggering Formula One's flexi wing clampdown? The potential for hidden one-way mechanisms and movable parts concealed by rubber components have emerged as key driving forces behind the FIA's latest Formula One flexi wing clampdown. From this weekend's Singapore Grand Prix, the FIA has got tougher on the design of front and rear wings in a bid to stop teams from playing games with flexible parts. As first revealed by Motorsports.com, the FIA has demanded to see all designs and drawings of wings ahead of the Marina Bay race to check that they comply, and has outlawed specific race wing ideas that it believes contravenes the rules. This includes wing elements that move or rotate in relation to the bodywork. They are fixed to use elastomeric or rubber fillets that can help permit localized deflection, plus designs that use soft trailing edges to aid flexing. The FIA has long forced a battle to stay on top of the team's flexi-wing antics, but its single-seater director Nicholas Tombazis has revealed how it was pushed to respond after discovering the lengths some teams were going to get around the rules. In an exclusive interview with Motorsports.com's Italian site, Tombazis has explained that the thinking behind the new tough stance over flexi-wings. In the regulations, we have many flexible criteria. There are loads that we apply, and a certain deflection is allowed, he said. There are static tests that we do to check, and it is obvious that these tests are never perfect, because the direction of the test load you apply is always a bit different from the load that it has out on track, when it experiences genuine aerodynamic force. There may be differences for this reason in the regulation. There are some general and conceptual specifications that, in essence, prohibit mechanisms. For example, one could draw a wing that, when applying the forces of the FIA test, it is fixed, but when applying any other load, it could be more flexible. For this reason, we have been clarifying for years that mechanisms are not legal, and we have written several clarifications on what we consider a mechanism. Tom Buses then suggested that a line has had to be drawn because of clever mechanisms that teams could use to get around the rules, which has included the use of designs hidden beneath rubber coverings. If under a carbon surface we have levers that allow deflection in one direction and not in another, we can consider this a mechanism, he said. Another thing we have said in the past that is not acceptable when a component has relative motion against an adjacent element, sliding in a different direction from it. What happened recently, some teams have components adjacent to each other that have a fairly high movement but do not slide in tandem. Because these areas are covered with rubber material, we do not consider this acceptable, and for this reason, we have made a clarification. Tom Bassis suggests that the teams have been exploring this point with both individual front wing elements and the attachments to with the nose. Furthermore, it has been inspecting the flexibility of lower wing components to the crash structure. The flexibility of upper wing elements has been policed thanks to the introduction of reference dots from the 2021 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. He added, we have observed some rotations and we have analysed them with the teams because we conduct some examinations. At the track, we will open up their components to see what's underneath, or we will look at their drawings in CAD to better understand how their various elements work. Asked if this was done in collaborations with teams, Tombasa said, it's not that they want to, but they have to. Lately we have seen drawings in which things were exaggerated. The trend was evident, so then we had intervened with a more severe clarification. So the FIA always going to try and get rid of ways that teams are going around the rules in 2022 and 2023 and going forward, because they want to allow teams to race more closely. We don't want teams finding little loopholes in the rules that allow them to make gains and just run away. Hopefully this is maybe finding where the Red Bulls are maybe finding a lot of pace this year, and maybe these clarifications are just going to rein them in a little bit more. We'll have to wait and see though what does happen in the Singapore Grand Prix. So just a little bit of stats going into the Singapore Grand Prix this race weekend. It is going to be the 16th round, if I'm not mistaken, of the Formula One Championship this year. It is a street circuit and has been held on the Formula One Grand Prix Canada since 2008. There's going to be 62 laps, and the circuit is a new circuit layout this year with only 19 corners. It used to be 21, but they have removed a section in the midsection with a new DRS detection zone being moved much further up. The track was built ahead of the 2008 Grand Prix here, and of course the circuit, one of the most physically demanding on the Canada, has a very bumpy street surface coupled with high humid conditions, giving the drivers plenty to think about throughout a lap. Even with a revised 2023 layout reducing the number of corners from 23 to 19, they are working with the wheel a lot. Around a high lap speed, the physical stress causing them to lose as much as 3 kilograms in body weight over the course of a race. So certainly one of the most grueling and enduring races that a Formula One driver must endure throughout a Formula One Grand Prix throughout this Canada year. So just talking a little bit about this revised circuit, I have spoken about it in another live news show, but just to go over it yet again, the redevelopment works in the vicinity of the track means that the section between turn 16 and 19 of the 2022 layout will now become one long 397.9 meters straight, reducing the total number of corners from 23 to 19. The changes, which are subject to the FIA approval, and will also require the removal of the bay grandstand while the redevelopment is carried out, are expected to see the circuit length reduced from 5.063 kilometers to 4.928 kilometers, with the number of laps in the Grand Prix likely increased from 61 to 63. Really looking forward to this race weekend. I always look forward to the Singapore Grand Prix. It's also very exciting for us as a channel because it marks our 1 year point from when we started doing watch-alongs with all of you guys. So really looking forward to it. Hope that all of you will join alongside with us for this Grand Prix race weekend. Mark there just saying to Singapore, crashes galore and potential red flags. Certainly, we always have a very exciting Singapore Grand Prix with lots of flags, lots of crazy weather. It's often during monsoon season here in Singapore, so who knows what it's going to be like this race weekend, but we're certainly really looking forward to it. Thank you very much though for joining alongside with us for this Formula 1 live news show. Yeah, please do be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and let us know where you're tuning in from and who you support for this season. Thank you very much for watching me. I have been Reece.